Hello SGD, Sacred Geometry Decoded, and this will be part one of a special presentation. Unlocking the Giza Plateau, the ancient science of astronomy, geometry and metrology of the pyramids. So we won't be examining just one of the pyramids, we'll be looking at the entire Giza complex as a whole, and through this we'll uncover a very interesting system. Now I'll put a link in the description to this ongoing playlist which will have much information regarding this presentation. I will condense some of the key points and add them in this presentation. However, to get the larger picture, this is for those genuinely interested. It's quite a few videos, quite a lot of time invested, I am sure, but the majority of this information I'm sure you haven't seen or heard anywhere else. What we have at the Giza Plateau is an interconnected system of geometry, astronomy, math and metrology that's built into the greater plan. And we're also going to identify the 0 point marker, the precise position on the plateau from where the larger complex was created and measured from. So here we have, of course, the Sphinx and the Sphinx Temple, but the Khafre Valley Temple, and this is the key point. Just above this doorway, standing on the roof, is the 0 point marker. In other temple complexes such as Karnak and elsewhere, the priests would go onto the roof to do their observations of the heavens. But this is the important part, okay? So then we have Khentkaue's tomb/pyramid. Then we have the three Giza pyramids, Menkaure, Khafre and Khufu, or the Great Pyramid. They are all related to one another through this 0 point marker. However, the geometry of each will also relate to one another, and more importantly than that, it's going to link to other very important of the great pyramids of Egypt. The Meidum Pyramid, the Bent Pyramid, and there in the distance we see the Red Pyramid, as well as the Pyramid of Unas, which is just here underneath the stepped Pyramid of Giza. I'll also be examining some of these other smaller unfinished pyramids, as they're called, dismantled pyramids such as the Meni Khmer, because they join together. They're actually part of a coherent system, and well, we can measure this, we can test this, and we will do so. I'll be speaking a lot about the pyramid texts of Unas. They are often referenced, and I'll address some of these issues in regards to that, but here at the Pyramid of Unas, this is what's often described as the oldest surviving religious texts in the world. Well, I would firstly say that they might have a religious aspect to them, but these texts are actually more appropriate to be thought of as a textbook with very poetic language. When they're referred to, at least amongst the popular presentations and theories, it's a focus on Osiris and on Orion. However, what's missing mostly is the references to Arkhet, or the flood season, or the inundation season. Orion and Sophis, which I've misspelt Sirius there, but the astronomy of Orion and Sirius are connected, and they are linked to this annual flooding. They are linked to the pyramid designs as well. Also, what's referenced throughout the pyramid text is the imperishable or the immortal northern stars of the sky. These are mentioned more, and when they are spoken of, they're spoken of in a much higher regard than Orion. Also, most focus on the pyramid text as being focused on the pharaoh's relationship, the king's relationship with Orion and Osiris. Well, yes, but more importantly is it's the reference to Atum, who was the father of the gods such as Osiris. Atum was the great-grandfather of Osiris. And even just by a simple word search, and the number of times Atum is mentioned as opposed to Osiris, and then when you read the text and how he's spoken of, Atum is the god of gods. Also, what is referenced multiple times and very importantly is the importance of Heliopolis. Iunu, as it was called, or Heliopolis in Greek, the city of the sun. This was the most ancient, the most precious site in Lower Egypt. That's Lower Egypt is northern Egypt. They call it lower because that's where the lower part of a river. This is where the Nile Delta begins. Unfortunately, now it's lost in the urban growth of Cairo and has become a rubbish heap. And this most sacred of ancient Egyptian sites, the center of the sciences and history and record keeping, as this has been told to us, has become not so. There's no tourist dollars. There's only a small park with one single remaining obelisk. Formerly older writers such as Strabo and others speak of how many obelisks there were in Heliopolis. There were more in Heliopolis than what there are large obelisks, I mean, across probably the rest of Upper and Lower Egypt. But this was the birthplace of the gods of the Ennead. And marked here is the sacred Ben mound of creation, again, which the ancient Egyptian texts describe there as being as Heliopolis, and references to Atum, the father of the gods, who was the first to emerge from the primal waters of creation upon the Ben mound. He gave birth to Geb, Nut, Nephthys, and all the other gods, including Osiris. Osiris was his great-grandson. Atum is the father of the Ennead. Atum is the god of gods. The pharaoh was linked to Osiris, but Osiris was born for generations after Atum. I'll link as many papers as I can, but this is one just confirming some recent survey work done to confirm the mound, which other ancient writers, even Roman writers, described to us, and also found in the Egyptian legends as well. So where the surviving obelisk is now in the Heliopolis Park is now almost in the center of the ancient mound, and the position of these will be a key feature in regards to the zero marker of the Giza complex. I would say, well, firstly, that Heliopolis and the priests there were vital in the design of all of these things, and that, as we can see with other pyramids, they're all aligned to the sacred mound. All of the not just the Giza pyramids, but other pyramids are way down south, are all arranged and aligned to this particular point. This was clearly, undisputably, the center of the pyramid cult and thinking, and it's been laid out for us in a very clear geometric, also metrological terms, because the measures confirm the geometry and the alignments, and that's the smoking gun in regards to this. That'll be for the next episodes. But before we begin, so we draw a rectangle. We've enclosed the three great pyramids and Khafre Valley Temple, so we get an idea that's pretty much the entire Giza complex. Now there are some necropolises and some smaller just hanging over the edge, but you've pretty much encapsulated the Giza complex there. 1,000, so 1 kilometer by 1.1 kilometers. This is the size of Heliopolis, for just the walls of Heliopolis. This does not include the connected infrastructure that goes with that, but just that part of it rivals the size of Giza. This is the largest temple complex walled in this is larger than the Angkor Wat. This is three times the size of Karnak, almost. Much larger than the entire Karnak complex. You can fit that in there and have heaps of room left over. Heliopolis is not a tourist site. It's been forgotten, but in ancient times it was virtually the holy of holies, at least in Lower Egypt. So the pyramid text of Unas, this will be a very important document in deciphering all of this. It is a book written in stone. Has the pyramid complex at Giza is a larger textbook written with stones, and we'll be able to confirm, measure and test and compare these things. The 7 liberal arts, for instance in Chartres Cathedral, the 7 liberal arts were taught. There are references to it back to ancient Greece. However, as the ancient Greek and Roman writers tell us, they learnt their geometry and their astronomy and their timekeeping from Egypt, and most specifically Heliopolis. So Plato, famous for geometry of the Platonic solids, he did a 13-year initiation at Heliopolis as described by Strabo. Also Eudoxus, the famous astronomer, also 13 years in Heliopolis. Now, based on that, the people such as Pythagoras and other initiates were studying at Heliopolis. Herodotus tells us that this was the most best source of history. So even Solon and these other stories, it was probably almost certainly at Heliopolis rather than Memphis or one of these other sites that these people were learning from, and they tell us this clearly. So we also get an understanding of the very sophisticated Roman technology, where it come from, and we can transfer that back to Egypt. But the 7 liberal arts, but especially the quadrivium, music, arithmetic, geometry and astronomy, these are things you can measure. These are things that are tangible, and this goes a long way to explaining what's going to happen here. So before any of this was built, first we must understand how and why it was designed. And before you build anything, you must survey the ground plan first. So before any construction, we must design and we must survey. And to do a survey, we need a 0-point marker, and that 0-point marker is right here on the northwestern corner of the Khafre Valley Temple, and I will prove this without doubt, well beyond reasonable doubt at least. Interesting book in regards to building rites and rituals, because what we will, as we'll see, the rituals and the symbols and the ceremonies connected to design and survey of ancient Egypt have been passed on to us and are very much intact in a lot of ways, and especially through the reference to such as, well, the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, and now we have, in air quotes, the secret societies. So Freemasons evolved from the old stonemason craft guilds, and we'll see a very strong connection. But this is a quote. Now, the most important part is that all building is necessarily an act against nature. When you build something, you have to destroy nature, and so this is why we still have groundbreaking ceremonies, and which leads to topping out ceremonies, ribbon cutting ceremonies, and these are part of a long tradition that goes back, and it's across the world: India, China, Japan. Some very interesting similarities between their ceremonies of groundbreaking cornerstones and building openings as well. But we'll be focusing on Egypt. But so before we think about anything, we must go back in time to before the pyramids. So this is just a random Nile Valley photo. So let's imagine this is the Giza Plateau before any work was done. Formerly the Nile River was much wider before the damming and other land reclamation, etc. So this would be a reasonable pitch. So even during the flood season, the Nile River has older images show us like really come very, very close to the Khafre Valley Temple and the Sphinx. But what was life like before, and why did they build? Now it's without a time machine, it's impossible to answer that definitively, but we can make a very, very, very strong case for at least some of the reasons, and those reasons we can be absolutely certain of based on measurable, tangible, testable facts. So before the pyramids were built, this was a time until 1970. The heartbeat of Egyptian life was the annual flooding of the Nile. This literally ruled the rhythms of life. The agriculture of the Nile it sustained the whole society, and it was based on the flood cycle, where water would come in, provide irrigation, but also bring very important silt. So nutrients from Africa, Central Africa, were washed down the river and deposited here in the what was pretty much otherwise desert. And this is the key. This was the rhythm of Egyptian life up until the High Aswan Dam in the 1970 was the completion date. These seasons of the Nile and the movements of the sun from solstice through to equinox to solstice are also connected to observations of the North Star, or how the heavens spin around and revolve around the northern or the imperishable stars. Now we need to look at Heliopolis, where the high priest was called the chief of the observers. He was the astronomer royal. The legendary architect Imhotep was also a high priest at Heliopolis, and very, very important place, but the most important place, that's at least the most overlooked important place in ancient Egypt, is surely Heliopolis. And what it makes it doubly special is that Heliopolis was also the primary sanctuary for the goddess Seshat. And again, overlooked, all but forgotten, but so important, especially in the further you go back, the more important Seshat becomes. She has many titles, many names, but there are variations of it, but there are sometimes 5 in later periods, especially down in southern Egypt, but she of 7 points. We see these 7 points connected to her. The Lady of Letters, so she's often shown with scribe tools, which is a little bit, but she was the inventor of writing, or the teacher of writing. All the scribes, and a scribe wasn't just a writer, that meant he was like very educated. He was a high official, and that's the old writing tools, and she's connected with them. You learnt your letters through Seshat. She was also the mistress of the House of Books. She was the record keeper. She kept the records, and Heliopolis was a place for records, as the older writers tell us as well, and also with smaller schools and sanctuaries around Egypt where records were kept. She was essentially the goddess of accountants, so when it comes to tax time, this is a very important thing. Also, because she was the goddess of measure, your land would be measured to how much tax you needed to pay, which is a connection to that. So mathematics, she was astronomy, goddess of geometry, the mistress of the house of architects. She was the goddess of surveying. She had the title foremost of the builders. She was also connected to weights and measures. She was the goddess of science, and at least she was the equal to Thoth in the past, if not greater than him, because the school of Seshat, now Thoth, become more important, and as time went on, more and more important, and Seshat has become slowly forgotten throughout this time. So if we're going to combine the knowledge of natural cycles, the cycles of heaven and earth observed through astronomy, as well as the pyramid texts, and look at the legacy of Seshat and what her role was, especially in architecture, and we're going to develop a very clear picture. This was not a primitive society, but was a sophisticated civilization governed by reason more than superstition. The priests were scientists and engineers. I've mentioned this article maybe in future, but it's a very interesting one, how one particular scholar has proposed an alternative view on the pyramid text, a more scientific view, where it tells a more story about the natural forces of life, astronomical information, as where the critics, Egyptologists, don't like it too much. They're certain that it is purely a book of magic spells to do with the king's travel through the dead. However, if we read it, well, it's an argument of essentially science versus religion in this place, and the Egyptologists are firmly convinced that this was a mystical text with no information apart from a book of spells. And her translation is basically a poet's impression. Well, no, I would say it's exactly the opposite. I would say that his is a poetic impression, and that through astronomy, geometry, etc., you will find that this is true. Now, is it a religion with science versus pure religion? Well, no, I would firmly suggest, emphatically suggest, it's a religion with science-based elements to it, the natural cycles, observations that require sophistication, measurement. And so, to put it very bluntly, in engineering terms, the Great Pyramid remains possibly still some of, depending on what way you look at it, the greatest feats of construction in human history. Now, to put that into perspective, this is Heron Tower in London, 46 floors, but the total height of a building is 756 feet, including the mast. It's including that spire on the top. The base of the pyramid of the southern face is 756 and a fraction feet.
it is as wide as Heron Tower is high. This is Arena Tower in London. It's a residential building, so the height of the floors, but it's 45 floors high, 149 metres or 485 feet high. Now I've shifted that so we get a better perspective. So that's Heron Tower. That's Arena Tower. It's 8 feet higher than what the pyramid was when before it lost a little bit off the top. If you drop this into almost any city, now these are large buildings, so most cities don't have buildings that are 756 feet higher. A 480 foot building in most cities it's a skyscraper. It would be quite impressive. Now, what's also worth noting is that these buildings are mostly air. So what you need to do is, if you squeezed out the air, now you get an idea of how many of these would you have to stack up to create just the Great Pyramid. And we have the Khafre's Pyramid, or Menkaure as well, but the Red, the Bent Pyramid, and this was engineering. These were engineers, scientists and engineers who created this. This was not done with magic spells. This was done through people who were very, very intelligent, very sophisticated, and had to understand their science, because the precision of these buildings is extraordinary. It's not just the size or the weight, it's the precision of the shafts and the elements in it. This is a scientific, so this is the work of engineers, astronomers, geometricians, metrologists. They may have had a religion also, not doubting that, but this is a work of people who were definitely not just scientists, but very, very skilled at what they were doing, and they did very they had to calculate things to a high precision to achieve this level of skill. So I would emphatically say that the pyramid texts, and we'll look at that more, they actually embed the reasons behind this. Everyone's focused on the king's journey, but it's actually describing the seasons and alignments and astronomical information, and that's just been overlooked in this. We want to project primitive superstition onto them, but just the engineering facts of it alone absolutely rule this out. This was very, very skilled work by scientists, not just by trial and you have to get this right before you begin, otherwise it's just not going to work. We must understand how the annual flood season, Arket, the inundation, was linked to the yearly rhythm of the sun also. So this is photos that were taken over the year, but on the summer solstice, so we're looking directly east on sunrise. This is taken in America, northern hemisphere, but the same happens all across the northern hemisphere. It's just reversed in the southern hemisphere. If you look directly east, the spring and autumn equinox fall directly east. The summer solstice, June 21st in the northern hemisphere, it happens 28 degrees across, and the winter solstice, or December 21, 22, again happens that same degrees to the side. Now it's also worth noting that if you map the angle, how the sun moves across the sky, that's another interesting feature as well, but not for this moment. So June 21st, the summer solstice, it will be 62 degrees. 90 degrees due east, the spring and autumn equinox. December 22, the winter solstice, 118 degrees. So if we read the pyramid text through the lens of nature rather than one of superstition, it will describe the design principles of the pyramids, but also the 3 seasons of Egypt: Arket, the inundation, the flood; Peret, the growing season; and Shemu, the harvest season. 3 seasons of 120 days each. However, this is also linked with the movement of the heavens, or the stars, around the northern, or as the Egyptians called them, the imperishable stars. This is a time lapse. If you go out at night, you'll see how the stars turn around this point. This is, in the dead center of it, is north. Now the Polaris, or the North Star, is not perfectly north. It's ever so slightly off, but it's still for surveying or for navigation, very important tool. but this was a very important feature to the Egyptians, the northern stars. So with the equinox, we get 90 degrees east, but also the sun will set at 270 degrees perfectly west. We have east and west, when on the day that night and day are equal. Equinox, night, equal night and day. This is an important feature for timekeeping as well. So let's keep calm and let's do some science with this. So geometry is earth measure. So it's measurement, but it's not just shapes, but that's even geometry is about mathematics and measurement. Geometry with compass and square was the old-fashioned way to do a calculator, to do your maths, to do your math proofs was done with compass and straight edge. To survey, before anything was built, we need to survey the site, and we need to find the survey marker, the 0-point marker from which all measurements and orientations are taken, and that is right there on the northwest corner on the roof of the Khafre Valley Temple. So now we need to look at Seshat and the stretching the cord ceremony, which was this ancient, very, very ancient ceremony in regards to setting up new temples. Seshat, you see her symbol there, the 7, with this inverted horn, let's call that for now. This is from Temple of Seti I. We see Seshat, who was the female counterpart of Thoth. The god of wisdom, he was the male, but she was the female. In many respects, she was his better. Because, for instance, Thoth, it was his duty, which probably went to a priest, but to do so. For instance, when the pharaoh went off and did battle, and he brought back goods and war prisoners, Thoth would take an account of those. But Seshat would double check his count, very much like the mathematicians in the Apollo program, computer with an OR. The females were doing the double checking. This is one of the images of Seshat stretching the cord ceremony. So when the pharaoh laid out a new temple, they would each have 2 pegs, and they would wrap a cord around it, and they would hammer in these pegs. They're hammering it in. That would give you the access of the temple. Now, the cord in itself, there's an important reference there, but again, we see this is from a bit later, so still the 7 points, but the ornamentation across the top, it's more like inverted bull horns now, but we'll look at the earlier ones first. But this is one of the depictions of Seshat stretching the cord, laying out a new temple. Before the temple was built, you need to lay out the groundwork, you need to find the axis, you need to find the orientation, and you also need to make your measurements. Link in the description is a whole series I've did in regards to Seshat and stretching the cord. So for a little bit longer version, you can go there. But Seshat was the goddess of math, librarians, record keeping, geometry, astronomy, surveys, architects, weights and measures, science in general. Now, in ancient Egypt, one cord, which was used by the rope stretchers for land survey. So when the Nile flood came in, it would sometimes take away land, and the landholder would have his land measured and his tax adjusted accordingly. But the cord that they used was 100 Egyptian royal cubits, with a knot every 10 cubits. So 100 divided by 10. Essentially a decimal system, very much like in Mohenjo-Daro, in these very ancient civilizations, which we don't usually connect to decimalization. Usually we think of the 12 inches, but there are connections there. So this is from Wepenefret, an image showing he was a high priest of Seshat. So we can, but that's the color image. That's the old symbol of Seshat. The later symbol looks like this, but this is the older symbol of it, and that's a very, very important feature in regards to Seshat's role. So, as Juan Belmonte, he's done some great work in regards to Seshat astronomy, that this was a survey tool. We just see now like a decorative aspect of it. But with this very simple survey tool, we were able to take sightings and, for one thing, to find true north. So there we see the Big Dipper. Currently, true north would be the line of this star. That's the pole star now. In antiquity, north was measured by the Big Dipper, which is in the Big Bear, Ursa Major constellation. And so that's one way where we can find north. Once we have north, we now have east and west. And with this, now we have northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, etc. this is a very simple tool. Now the Romans were using essentially the same thing. They called it a grommer. And it was 4 stakes at 90 degrees from each other. Then we would have 4 plumb lines hanging down. Now the Roman survey was just brilliant. For instance, the aqueducts, the way they were able to survey it through the air. So it had a constant grade of 1 to 4,800. So every 4,800 feet, it would fall 1 foot. And that was consistent. And with these very simple tools, they were able to do it. A Roman surveyor's tool again shows a grommer with the plumb lines hanging down. Also, dikes were made that were hundreds of kilometers long, dead straight. This is another tool which is also described by Heron and also Hyginus Grammaticus. This is a chorabate. So this was how you would find how did they keep their level. Again, just a simple flat table. They would use water to find their level, and then they had plumb lines to make sure that the instrument itself was level. Very simple tools, and again, the Romans, Greeks inherited this specifically through Heliopolis, but also from India and the people of the twin rivers, Tigris, Euphrates, and they tell us this as well. So the tools of survey have not really changed. So these are some tools of George Washington, and I'm going to be referencing George Washington because this ancient traditions have been passed from Egypt to the Greeks and Romans, and then on to the modern world, and best seen through the eyes, especially of conscientious Freemasons. Yes, these older ones, but George Washington's survey tools. Apart from the magnetic compass, little has changed. We just have a sighting tool. We can use a level, but another important instrument is this. This is called a chain. A Gunther's chain. Made official by Edmund Gunther and Queen Elizabeth I. It's 66 feet long, and it's divided into 100 links with one of these little keys hanging every 10 links. So you could do your count very easy. So 10 links, 2 corners 20 links, 3 corners 30, 4 corners 40, etc. Just like the Egyptians. So before the base 10 system is more often recognized, we see again in Mohenjo-Daro there's evidence for this. So before any of this was built, it had to be surveyed. It had to be designed, and then it had to be surveyed. And there are a few things we really need to survey a site. We need a 0-point marker. We need a way of orientation, north, east, south, and west. And we need a measurement system. Well, we have the Egyptian royal cubit, which defines the pyramids precisely. Now, for instance, the Grand Gallery is 4 Egyptian royal cubits wide. The upper chamber or king's chamber of the Great Pyramid is 20 by 10 royal cubits inside and out. We also have surviving rods. There is no dispute about the Old Kingdom cubit and how it relates to these particular buildings, and this will be very important. And also the rope stretches using 100 cubits of divided into 10. Seshat and the cord and the cubit are really going to come into importance, but first laying down the groundwork. So with north, we can easily find the other cardinal directions. It's very easy to find. The North Star is there every night. It's the immortal, the imperishable stars. Finding east and west, you would have to calculate the equinox perfectly. However, if we can find north and north alone, we can then very easily get east and west. So north is actually more favourable to finding our cardinal points. And how do we find north? Again, we can use the stars, and I'll show you more on that in a moment. But back to the seasons. So the summer solstice, the equinox, spring and autumn, and the winter solstice. There we get east. But this is the summer in the northern hemisphere, June 21st. That's the longest day of the year. In spring and autumn, the equinox, equal days, and then we have the shortest day of the year, the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. But just to illustrate, that's the cycle of life. This is the rhythm of life. This is fundamental to all. This is why you'll find across time, cross cultures, across the world, the importance of this, because this governed their life. There's no getting around it. All religions are built on this, and they begin with this cycle. An important thing, curious thing happens on the solstice, winter and summer. each day the sun will rise in a different location until it gets to the solstice, winter or summer, and then it appears to rise and set in the same position for 2 to 3 days in a row. This is a very interesting feature because, in other words, the sun rises in a different position from the previous day 365 out of a 360 out of a 365.24 days of a year. So from the summer solstice is 180 days to the winter solstice, and it sets in the same place for a couple days in a row, and then it moves 180 days back. This is very important feature. But okay, the Pyramid of Kukulkan in Mexico is one example. On the equinox we see split by shadow. Important to note as well, these stairways are 45 degrees and these are 53 degrees. That's compass and square geometry if you're into it. But okay, so we also have 91 staircases, 4 staircases, so 364 in total, plus 1 step to get to the top, 365 day year and the equinox. This is a cross time. Now the Mayan calendar was 360 days for the year, plus an extra month of 5 days. This was the time of rebirth. The Roman calendar had 360 days, 12 times 30, plus a 5-day period when new ventures were seen as bad luck. Now this is no coincidence, it's the same as the Egyptian, because the Romans inherited this the Julian calendar come from the Egypt. Now the Egyptians had 4 seasons of 120 days, 12 months of 30, so 360 day year, plus 5 days, the intercalary period, which was considered to be the birth time of the gods. This has to do with why Thoth one every second day from the moon. 72 times 5 gives us 360 plus the 5 days. There's all sorts of interesting little connections in regards to that as well, but the same system is a very common one. Now, this is probably the source of the 360 degree compass. This will be the origin of a 360 degree division or measurement of a circle. This is lost in time exactly when, but it'll be a very important feature when it comes to the Giza plan, and we'll explore it more in the future. But just like time, each hour is divided into 60 minutes, each degree is divided into 60 minutes, and then each minute is divided into 60 seconds. This has to do with the ancient Mesopotamian numeration system built around the number 60. It's still a legacy, ancient legacy with us today. So we have the 3 seasons of 120 days which defined ancient Egypt: the Archet, or the inundation or the flood season; Peret, the growing season; Shemu, the harvest season. Unlike the 4 seasons that most people assign, with different cultures in different environments have different seasons, but the Egyptians had 3. There we can see how each season would essentially closely relate to the solstice or the equinoxes. We'll examine that more because there's some lovely math, lovely geometry and astronomical connections in the floor plan of the wider Giza complex, and this extends of course to other pyramids and entire pyramid fields across Lower Egypt. These seasons would have been vital to the Egyptians before they were agricultural. So for people on the Nile River, this was the cycle, the rhythm of life, whether hunter-gatherers or agricultural. This defines essentially the human experience across the world. Now, not these 3 seasons, but the equinox, solstice, that defines the year cycle. I'll link this paper in the description because including Newgrange, Mays Howe, the Medicine Sun Wheel in Canada, which is very old, doesn't include Wurdi Yuang here in Australia. It's just reversed between summer equinox and winter there, southern hemisphere. But this is essential. You need to understand this, whether you're farming or whether you're hunting. You need to understand this system, and this is why it's so important and why it's the basis for all religions, all cultural experiences. cannot be, it's not just humans, all biology on life is ruled by this particular cycle of time. That's why it's so important. That's why so much effort went to it. That's why it's universal. So back to the Giza Plateau. So before any of this was built, we need a zero marker, we need some orientation, measurement systems, and also a philosophy or a meaning or a purpose for it. And in that we can see the natural cycles of time, the rhythms of life. This is what gives us the purpose for it. So here we have the equinoxes, paper by Giulio Magli. I'll link this as well. He showed, so from here at the Khafre Valley Temple, he saw how the summer solstice passes right in between Khafre's and the Great Pyramid. The causeway to Khafre's pyramid splits this angle, and then we have the east-west, west to east equinox cycle, solstice and equinox. So again, if you're here in the Khafre Valley Temple, and what I'm saying is now the zero survey mark, and I'll explore this a lot more, but on the sunset of a summer solstice, the longest day of the year, this is where the sun would set, and this would mark the beginning of the flood cycle, which is Arket. This is a symbol for Arket, the season of a flood. So even just from the old images, we see how different the landscape was during this time prior to the land and irrigation schemes and the building of a High Aswan Dam. This is why it was so important, because this water brought life, it brought nutrients, the rhythm of life. So I looked in further, and I thought I'd look at other connections, and so I went 14 degrees south of that line, and what do we hit? We hit the Menkaure Pyramid. 256 degrees, 270 minus 14, and the measurement is also very interesting as well. So another 14 degrees, and there we touching the corner of Kent Kaue's tomb / pyramid, 242 degrees, at just a touch over 314 meters, interestingly as well. So now we have that the larger Giza complex, including Kent Kaue's, Menkaure, Khafre, and the Great Pyramid, are a calendar, and they're celebrating, honouring the flood cycle, Arket, through to the growth cycle and then the harvest cycle. And there's quite a bit more, and it's also interesting that each one of these lines is hitting something, you could say. The summer solstice line, which marks the flood, does not. It is like an eternal, it's set apart from the rest. Now the same happens on the equinox, in that this line touches the base of Khafre's pyramid, which is another important feature in regards to the equinox, equal day, equal night, 43,200 seconds per day, 43,200 seconds per night, and how this connects to the Egyptian royal cubit and a 1 meter 1 second pendulum, timekeeping of 1 second, but we'll explore that more. So because I couldn't find a good view, I couldn't put the sunset on the horizon, but the winter solstice would fall on the corner there of Kent Kaue's pyramid, if you're standing on this 0 point marker. Winter solstice to Menkaure pyramid. Because of the angle, this is actually in line with this point, but on line with the southern base of Khafre's pyramid, the autumn equinox, partially obscured, we would see the midpoint between equinox and the summer solstice, which matches again Arket. Now I'll do more, but let's look a little bit further. Okay, so what did I find? To the base of Khafre's pyramid, if from the 0 point marker we draw a large circle, it marks the corner of Khafre's pyramid and it marks the corner of the Great Pyramid. It's equidistant. This is a design element. Now, possibly, let's say it's coincidence. Well, just so happens that that same distance marks the very center of the Great Pyramid. Now, from this point to that point, if I was to extend a line out, the line would go exactly to the sacred mound at Heliopolis. Just like with the diagonal of Khafre's pyramid, just like the diagonal of Menkaure's pyramid. But this circle, it actually marks this particular location. This makes it very significant. This is the 0-point marker, and there's more to come in regards to this, because the metrology, the measurement systems in this are just extraordinary in so many aspects. But just even considering just the accepted Egyptian raw cubit, there's so much information there. So without doubt, this is the 0-point marker, and it just gets, there's so much more to come in regards to this. But again, let's look at Seshat again. So before it's built, the laying out ceremony, the stretching the cord ceremony, where we find the axis of the temple and Seshat. The stretching the cord ceremony is even in the Palermo stone. It's one of the oldest referenced, including the Head Seb festival and others. This is reported and recorded when they went to effort to record this. Now, along each year, they would also record the Nile flood in cubits, palm, and fingers, and we can even see the symbol of Seshat there as well. Stretching the cord ceremony, foundation of a new temple. The Seshat priest would, for the great door, the throne of the gods. This is the, here we can see now Seshat's partly obscured. We see the pharaoh's partly obscured, but we see Seshat. This is the oldest actual image of it that's survived. And again, we see the stretching the cord ceremony, hammering in the mallets. This is a later version from the Temple of Edfu, Ptolemaic era, but just because it's a better image to see. But again, the 7 points. North, now we need to consider North and the arrangement of temples. So from the surviving writings describing the Seshat stretching the cord ceremony, I have grasped the stake with the handle of the mallet. I take the measuring cord in the company of Seshat. I observe the progressive movement of stars. My eye is now fixed upon Mesketu. The god of timekeeping stands by me in front of his Merkit. Then I have established the 4 corners of your temple. So what is Mesketu? Now this is a image, just refer to the bull's leg, but firstly, for instance, at the step pyramid, there's a strange structure which has a statue inside 2 holes. This looks directly north. It looks at the North Star. The god of timekeeping stands before me with his Merkit. So this is an ancient device. It's again a plumb line. So just like by hanging plumb lines from this instrument of Seshat, we would have a grommer, which gives us a very accurate sighting tool. A Merkit was used. So for instance, a plumb line, where we have a slit and a sighting line in between there, just like the sighting line in between the oldest images of Seshat's symbol, which can be used to keep time for one, but also to measure the stars. Now a plumb line, any pendulum is going to swing at the same rate. The length of the pendulum counts. It's not going to slow down as it gets close. But what we have now, this is an interesting point. Now the pole star at that time, but the North Star now is not the North Star back then. That's a very important feature. But with these simple tools which work, they were none too different until modern electronics and stuff come along. So these are very powerful tools. We also see references to Mesketu. After he cut out his foreleg, he threw it into the sky. Spirits guard it there. The great bear, which is Mesketu of the northern sky. The great hippopotamus guards, keeps hold of it. We can see the hippopotamus Mesketu references in other astronomical texts from the Egyptians as well. But this is Set, was his leg. Okay. Now here's an issue with Mesketu. So currently we have the Big Bear constellation, Ursa Major, and Polaris. Now Polaris is not very bright, but the Big Dipper, which makes up the Big Bear, points to the North Star. So that's how people, still find the North Star now. You follow the line. It's very hard to find the North Star. It's very dim. It can get lost in there, but to find it, you use the Big Dipper. Now there you see the image of Mesketu. Now back to something in some recent videos I covered, the issue in regards to astronomical art. Now, if you look at most astronomical art, Leo is facing the other way. And if you look up at the sky, Leo is facing the other way. But this is a globe, and it's looking down, how it would be projected down onto the Earth. we see the same here. Leo faces the same way. Leo and Leo. This is, just call it the God's eye view. This is projection coming down onto the Earth. And this is the issue with Mesketu. So all we need to do is reverse that image of Mesketu. Instead of thinking of it as how it would look from us above, we need to think of how Mesketu would look coming down, and in which case it fits the Big Dipper perfectly. So we've just done a God's eye view of the Mesketu, and there we see how it aligns with Polaris. Now, Polaris in the tail of the Little Bear, Ursa Minor, is the current North Star. Historically, you go back in time, 1500 BC to 500 AD, it was on the shoulder of the Little Bear. Now we can use Mesketu again to find that line. And going back even further, so 1800 BC to 3900 BC, it was here in Draco the Dragon in Tuban, and that too gives us a very good image, and I'll show you what I mean. So now we can use this. There we see the Big Dipper behind there. Polaris to Koshab, and also, well, actually lines better to Tuban. So this image here was a bit artistic in that they haven't done a better star chart. We'll show you. So Mesketu gives us the North Star going back to essentially 4000 BC. Mesketu, this is there have been criticisms in regards to that. Well, they're simply not, they're looking at it from below, they're not looking at it from above, and not considering the position of a North Star. The North Star moves in axial precession, 26,000 year cycle, essentially linked to equinoctial, the precession of the equinoxes. But so as the North Star moves, and historically that's where it was, and that's where it is now. And again, back to Belmonte's image, he's doing it properly, unlike some other images I found, that we, instead of using that to find today's North Star, the Seshat Grommer sighting tool found the North Star as it was back at this very, very important date. This brings us to the Great Pyramid and the so-called air shafts. Virginia Trimble and Alexander Badawi in 1963-64 first published that for instance, the shafts leading to the north from the lower or the Queen's Chamber and the upper or the King's Chamber, in approximately 2500 BC, they would have aligned with the North Stars Tuban and Kokhab. There has mainly focused around Gaddenbrink, who sent some of those robots up the shafts. Well, it was known by Trimble and Badawi back in the time, but it's a little bit simplified there. But what we have is, for instance, these shafts. There is a twist and a turning before they begin. However, again, you would barely notice it to begin with. So that there is a little twist and a turn before we begin. Well, if you go on a dead straight road for 100 miles, but you drive a few hundred feet on an on-ramp, does that mean that the road is not dead straight? However, there's another important feature to think about that. So there we would see Mesketu, and that these shafts are aligned. It's a very pedantic point. However, there's also evidence for it because, for instance, the causeway to Khafre's pyramid also takes a turn. Does it not run to that point because there is a dogleg turn in it? Now, in the Red Pyramid, you'll see the same thing where the causeway turns. Now, this is not the only examples. This is almost a standard now. Even if you look at the chambers underneath of all the other pyramids, they have twists and turns, even though they have a major path, but there will be short turns. This is the norm rather than the exception. So I think that this criticism of the shafts having these small turns in them is, well, short-sighted, I would say. However, so Mesketu, it is the Big Dipper.
the reference, it just is in regards to these other features, and Seshat stretching the cord, eye fixed upon Musketiu, and the northern alignments, which can be found in all pyramids. So they're all aligned northeast, but with one or two exceptions, but of all of the great pyramids, their entrance is to the north. I take the measuring cord, again keep in mind a 100 Egyptian cubit cord as a measuring tool. Then I've established the four corners of your temple. This is one of the descriptions of the ceremony of stretching the cord. So why are all pyramids aligned to the north? Back to the pyramid text of Unas. So for instance, but you shall become clean in the cool waters of the stars and board the sun boat. That's probably the one next to the pyramid, or one of them, but on the cords of metal, on the shoulders of Horus in his identity of the one who is in Sokar's boat. Now, Atum was the sun god of the dawn, Horus was the sun god of midday, and Khepri was the sun god of the evening. So they're also, the sun gods must be, especially in Lower Egypt, Heliopolis and the Delta and the land of the pyramids, but he goes in Sokar's boat. The populace will cry out to you once the imperishable stars have raised you aloft. And what are the imperishable stars? They are the northern stars marked by Musketiu. I'll get to this. So there's I'll put this article as well. The Susan Bryn Morrow, she's retranslated the pyramid text, and she got some criticism from Egyptologists because she looked at them in a scientific, looking at, she said she believes it is a proof of a complex religious philosophy, one that was less about mythology and more about the life-giving forces of nature. She also believes ancient Egyptian philosophy influenced many of the spiritual traditions that come after it. We'll look at that in a moment because it's still with us today in many ways. James P. Allen, who the translation I'm using, James P. Allen, an Egyptologist at Brown University, produced the 2005 translations of a text, isn't convinced. He likened her translation to the work of amateurs and called it a serious misrepresentation of the pyramid text. It is a translator's job to be as faithful to the original as possible while using words and constructions that make sense to modern readers. Miss Morrow has not done that, he said. Her translation is basically a poet's impression of what she thinks a text should say, and not a reflection of what they actually say. Well, pot meet kettle, because we see one of the pyramid texts. This is what James P. Allen says. The pyramid texts are largely concerned with the deceased's relationship to two gods, Osiris and the sun. Egyptologists once considered these two themes as independent views of the afterlife that have become fused. So you can pause and read that, and I'll link James P. Allen's text, and I'll also link this article. But what we have here is an argument between pure spiritualism versus hidden, or knowledge in plain sight. We'll come back to this, but if we look at the text, the imperishable stars have raised you aloft. Now this is another important passage. Your head is Horus of Adua, an imperishable star, Atum's twins, Atum's imperishable star, the jackal, Sodpu, imperishable star. Now you'll find these are not the only, multiple references to imperishable star, and even that the boat will take you to this particular place. Shortly after that we see there are 3 references to Orion and 4 references to Sophis or Sirius, but Orion has become encircled by the Duat, has the living one become clean in the Archet. Sophis has become encircled by the Duat, has the living one clean in the Archet. So what I'm using, this is the famous Dendera zodiac, which is also from the late Ptolemaic era. Now if you look at much older descriptions, you'll see Musketiu, the bull's leg, and the hippopotamus together, which referenced earlier. But what are the imperishable stars? Well, there were 2 types of stars basically for the Egyptians. There was the Inkemwe Reg, pardon the pronunciation. These were the unwearying stars. They never got tired. They were essentially the constellations. Those that travelled through the night were always moving. As where the imperishable stars were immortal. They were the northern stars. They were always there. All the other stars move around them. That is the most godly of the godly stars, as where Orion, Sirius, or Pleiades, these come and go throughout the year. They're not always there and they're always moving. But the imperishable stars are the immortal ones, and that's where they point to. Now, on a side note in regards to the Dendera zodiac, so there's an image of it. This was a Ptolemaic era, and what we find is that the Greek, or actually the Babylonian/Greek zodiac has snuck in there. So, for instance, we see Libra, the scales, Scorpio, the scorpion, Sagittarius, half horse, half man with his bow and arrow, Capricorn, the goatfish, Pisces, the doublefish, tied together by a string, Aries, the ram, Taurus, the bull, Cancer, and Leo. Now Leo's riding on, well, it looks like a serpent, and then we have Hydra, the water snake, also in there. So what's however, we do see the adze, or the hippo with the knife, and Mesquetu. These are the imperishable, the northern stars, and that can be found on older images as well, but they're not drawn in the zodiac form. It's in a more elaborate sense and to be read in columns, not in a circle. But so Mesquetu, the imperishable stars, this is the destination of this journey. Now, Orion and Sophis are mentioned, but they actually relate to this, and Orion and Sophis are mentioned in relation to the archet, the horizon, but also the season of the flood. So we come back to the Great Pyramid. So we see these two shafts, and the shafts they're 95 or above % leading there. There are some a couple of twists and turns to get there, very short. Then we have a long straight, which would lead us to the imperishable stars. We're tracking the North Star. While the other two, now the King's Chamber, I think that's an appropriate name because it leads to Alnitak in Orion's belt, and that's the male aspect, as where now it's Canis Major, the dog star. On the tip of the nose is Sirius, which is Alnitak, Orion's belt, connected with Osiris, and Sophis or Sirius connected to Isis. From the King's Chamber to the male, from the Queen's Chamber to the female. Now, I'm just using that in a poetic sense because I don't know the actual purpose. Okay, so, but just saying it does make sense in that way. Now, what's so important about Sirius is that it's the brightest star in the constellation. So we have the shafts leading to the imperishable stars, and then we have Orion and Sophis shortly afterwards, which are leading to there. Now they're mentioned in regards to Archet. Orion, Archet, Sophis, Archet. Archet, the inundation, the flood season, vital to life, the essence of that. Sirius, or the dog star, it's the brightest star in the sky. And we referenced again, we saw earlier to Archet, very well, matching the Khafre and Great Pyramid on the summer solstice when the flood cycle is marked to begin. So 3 seasons, we see the summer solstice, that would be that marks June 21 now. In the past, that would calendars shift over the years, but that marks the flood season of Archet. Orion, Archet, Sophis, Archet, the flood season. The heliacal rising of Sirius. So Sirius is one of the unwearying stars. It's not like the North Stars, which is perpetually there. It's only visible for parts of the year. And so Sirius disappears, and then after about 70 days, I think it's about, it re-emerges. And today the heliacal rising of Sirius happens in August, but back in 3000 BC, around about that time, the heliacal rising of Sirius, when it rose with the sunset, is the heliacal, as in Helios, the sun. It rises with the sunset, and it would have coincided with the summer solstice or the beginning of the flood season. Now, because Orion's belt points at Sirius, this is another, if we read them in these ways, we see how Orion, the male and the female aspect, come together to mark out Archet, the flood season, the cycle of life, which is connected to the rhythm of the sun, sun gods and gods in the stars, the imperishable northern stars. These are the most god. That's why they're imperishable. This is a photo. Just for someone on astronomy, but this would have been the view. So if you're looking from Memphis on the sunrise, you would see Sirius, but also Venus would coincide with that. But that's the planets are a different thing. So summer solstice, June 21st, the sun rises right between the two pyramids, as viewed from the 0 point marker, mind you. Sirius would have risen on in that same period. Only the exact date is argued over, but around about 3000 to 2500 BC, all these natural cycles of the flood with the summer solstice and the helical rising of Sirius, the alignment of the pyramid shafts, the actual text is what they say. Again, that will be linked. You can read through it further. Look into references to Artum, Heliopolis, and Arket. Now, you will find there are very few references to Sophis and Orion, but they are important because they fit part of a bigger picture. But Arket is season. So all societies, no less the Egyptians, were living by these cycles, and the 3 seasons coincide very beautifully. And we're going to do more because there's so much in regards to this 0 point marker and how much information it has. But back to Seshat and the stretching the cord ceremony. We've already looked now at what we've been. So this is there are bits and pieces there. Okay, so an inscription on the western outer wall from Edfu. So this is a later Ptolemaic period, but we do find there are very old references to it. The actual architecture fits with it. The astronomy, the seasons, all of that fits with it. But we have from this particular Edfu temple, we do have a good, a more fuller version of that, and there's some interesting information in regards to, well, the Merkit, the bull's foreleg, Mesketu, astronomical instrument, and the text associated with the stretching of a cord, where the signs of Mesketu include a composite hieroglyph. So just to zoom in on this text a little bit, make sure I view a text associated with a stretching of the cord ceremony, where Mesketu include a composite hieroglyph, something very typical in the Ptolemaic and Roman periods. The text should read Ark of Mesketu and the rising of the plough accordingly. Now this is very important, and will which brings us back to stretching of a cord done by Seshat, the survey, construction, writing, mathematics, also called She of 7 points. King Nama, so he's considered the first king of Egypt. However, he has the 7 points in the Nama palette. However, before Nama, we have King Scorpio. So in the Palermo stone, they name kings before Nama, and you'll note he is raising the plough. Arket, the Arket season, and so also connected to Heliopolis, where we see the cycle of water coming around with the Arket symbol, and again raising of the plough, an agricultural symbol. And you'll also notice that the men are rather fertile at this particular time of year, the fertility cycles. Also, so that means time, and we have nice connections there. I won't go into that. I have to always double check with the dictionaries. But back to the constellations, and so again, I'm using the Dendera zodiac, but you will find the same imagery on the much older astronomical connections. The imperishable stars of the north, the bull's leg Mesketu, guarded by the hippopotamus. But there again we see the adze, the plough tool, the tool connected with there in the northern stars. And so the stretching of the cord ceremony. Now this later description, there are bits and pieces older, but the Ptolemaic one is intact, and it describes the process of the king creating creating a new temple. Firstly, survey. So the king departs from his palace. The king arrives at the site of the new temple. The king and the goddess Seshat stretch a cord around 2 poles that define the temple axis. There we see stretching the cord. The king digs a trench down to the water table. The king molds 4 bricks for each of the corners. Okay, now we can go to them. So these ceremonies of, for instance, when we open a building, there's the ribbon cutting ceremony. Now in our world we don't have too much ceremony anymore, but some have lingered, and these stretching the cord, the groundbreaking ceremonies, cornerstone ceremonies and ribbon cutting for opening a new building, these are architectural rituals that are still around. And so we have the stretching the cord. Then the king molds 4 bricks. Now we think Egypt stone. Most of Egypt was mud brick, and even some of it, like the walls around Karnak and other places, we see that these are mud brick. It's very, very sturdy material. They knew what they were doing in terms of making them. But the king molds 4 bricks at the 4 corners of the temple. So we've aligned the temple. We found north in the axis. Now most temples which are along the Nile, as they are aligned to follow the river themselves, but they also have an orientation point. The king places a number of stone or metal plaques at the 4 corners of a temple. The king moves into place the first stone blocks. Now this is the cornerstone ceremony. Now I'm going to go back to George Washington and Masonic tradition, because especially through Masons, Oddfellows, these ancient rituals of building have persisted and still remain. They almost died out, and it was, especially in America, it was reinvigorated, especially with the Masons. So the cornerstone of the US Capitol building, Masons in procession, and there we see the tripod. Now again, this ancient symbol of a block and tackle for a lifting tool. We see the compass and the square. And we also see these 3 gentlemen here. That's an important feature, because grain, wine and oil, grain, a bottle of wine and a bottle of oil, are very important, still used in Masons. So if they're opening a new public building, or a school, they'll call the Masons in to do these ceremonies because no one else is doing them. And when they lay the cornerstone, they'll pour wine, grain and oil on the stone to consecrate the stone. And even there's the legacy of ancient traditions that have sort of never really been lost. Playlist in a description to cornerstone ceremonies, plumb lines, grain or corn, oil and wine as well. These are also throughout that series. For instance, the Bible is full of what would just now be called Masonic information, or occult, but it's biblically based, and it actually can go trace back to at least the Temple of Solomon, King Hiram, or Hiram Abiff, and these legends that go around there. Now, the king places a number of stone or metal plaques at the 4 corners of a temple. The king moves into place of first stone blocks. What you'll find now, still with cornerstones, and again you'll see that in that series, that they're connected with time capsules. So when they lay in, and then 100 years later, the cornerstone will be reopened and examined. And this was also done. So, for instance, in Roman times, when they wanted to set a new town, they would purify the enclosure, like Feng Shui with Chinese and Eastern. They'll look at the movement of clouds, birds, stars, etc., to find the precise moment, the best time to do it. Holes were dug in the ground to hold good things or contain the earth transported by settlers from elsewhere. The whole population participated. This was an important ceremony to get you a good building, to get a good city. You want to get everything right, and if you don't survey it properly, it's going to be a mess. If you don't design it properly, it's going to be a mess. So this is a very important feature, not just the temple plan, but the town planning as well. George Washington, so the George Washington Monument in Baltimore, this is the cornerstone
time capsule that was connected with there. Now, for instance, in the Bible, Psalms 118:22, the stone which the builders this is not just one rare example, you will find many, but the stone which the builders rejected has become the head of a corner. This is an important feature because, for instance, St. Mary's Cathedral here in Sydney, in the Crypt Museum down below, we see the square, a trowel and a mallet. These are cornerstone ceremonial tools. For instance, Roosevelt, once the cornerstone's laid, then it's mortared in place, and we use a trowel to do that. These are also symbols from masonry, and again, most of these, virtually all the symbols, they have multiple meanings, but we see important tools of masonry and of construction, even the scythe of agriculture and fertility, the coffin, cycle of life, faith, hope and charity, timekeeping, squares and plumb lines or levels. So the stone the builders now, the head of a corner refers to usually the capstone that's placed on top, but also can refer to the keystone, but the capstone on top. So there's another ceremony which is called the topping out ceremony. So when they place the last steel beam on a building, they'll put a tree on there, or even you'll see when they make a house. Now this is again very old tradition, going back to when you do the top of your building, you want to do a little blessing. You want to do something, at least, even if just to mark the occasion and make something special of this special moment. Which brings us to, so in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, now they're laying a cornerstone, and the first block, the cornerstone, is moved into place with metal plaques. Now there's an interesting feature here because, again, what is a common practice is to hold a miniature of this particular building as you're laying the cornerstone, which is very similar to the stretching of the cord ceremony. So step 10, the king presents the temple to the god. Once more the temple is represented as a miniature. So you've already shown that you've planned it. That's one of the features. This is what you're going to do, and you want to make sure it's done correctly. Now, on a side note, Seshat, god of weights and measures, Thoth, the god of weights and measures, 2 rods with snakes round about them. Hermes, the Greek god of science, weights and measures, the caduceus with 2 snakes around, otherwise known as Mercury to the Romans, and the more familiar symbol of the caduceus, the 2 snakes wound about the rod, which was a magic wand given to him by Apollo, and back in the day the wand translated into rod, measuring rod as well, gods of weights and measures. Which brings us to this particular emblem. It's a caduceus. Now the rod of power, it also suggests you have the authority. Only the king, only the noble has the power to say what a foot is, what a meter is, what a yard is. This is even now a very important power. This is taken very seriously. Standardizations, even like USBs, we all need to be standardized and be working on a standard for things to work in society, and this was no different in the past. Okay, I'll put a link in the description to a series talking about these rods and symbols of measure across time, across cultures, across the world, going back. Go back to the stretching the cord ceremony. And so step 9, the king purifies the temple by throwing natron all around the building, presented as a small shrine. In the pyramid text, again, references natron. Now natron is, so this is a bag of natron from Tutankhamun's embalming case. Now natron was very important in mummification, so Lake Natron in Tanzania, because of this high calcium, it mummifies creatures. So there's lots of interesting pictures of creatures that have, you get, it's a mummification. It sucks the moisture out. Natron's also a very important chemical. Now you can, again, just do a wiki search on that to get, and then track a little bit further to look into the chemistry of it. But historically, natron was harvested, salt mixture from dry lake beds in ancient Egypt, used as a cleaning product, blended with oil. It was an early form of soap, water softener, mouthwash, antiseptic,
preserve fish and preservative, salt. Salt was very, very valuable in the ancient times. We take it for granted. Salt was very important. There was a huge trade in salt. An insecticide, used for making leather as well as a bleach for clothing, important in mummification ceremonies, drying agent. And this is faience glass. So this blue, even sacred blue has always been colours and dyes have been very expensive and a well-kept secret, but Egyptian blue glass and later cultures, blue glass was especially valuable. But natron was also used as a flux. So to attach these, you would, so if you've got two pieces of copper, you want to solder them together, what you need to do is paint a bit of flux on, and then you can solder it together. You don't just use the solder. And natron was also used as a flux by the Romans as well to put precious metals together. So jewelers as well were using natron as a flux. But the most important one, and to answer the question for me, was the added to castor oil. It makes a smokeless fuel, which allowed Egyptian artisans to paint elaborate artworks inside ancient tombs without staining the soot. I did a video some time ago in regards to Egyptian colour making and Vitruvius, who describes the chemistry of colour making. But how did they, the ceiling should be covered with soot from the smoke. How did they carve the chambers underneath the Great Pyramid? One of the main ideas was that they were using mirrors and they were reflecting sunlight from outside, which is very tricky. You have to keep it very well adjusted, but it's not very successful. But by mixing natron in castor oil, you have a smokeless fuel. This way you can not smoke out your area where you're working, and you don't stain the roof either. Natron is very important. And just like grain, oil and wine on cornerstones to consecrate them, natron was so we find natron-rich chemistry in pyramids, and it's been associated with some other things, but each time you lay a stone, you cleanse it, you bless it each time, and this is possibly the explanation for the presence of so much natron around there, but I couldn't say definitively. You can read between the lines on what this alternative idea is. So the stretching the cord ceremony of Seshat has many parallels, continues with stonework, masonry, the symbolic aspects of that, and it is through the records that are left to us, such as those describing Seshat, Heliopolis, and the pyramid texts, that we can make essentially Susan Bryn Morrow is, I would say, 100% spot on. And although, all glory, power to the Egyptologists and these people who spend years and decades studying and doing these works, however, with a multidisciplined mind, as she is applying, we can really take it to the next level, as where specialists are, specialists in their area, and it can be difficult to see outside of the box. But when we examine, and I will link the pyramid text of Unas, which also includes the later text, and which is essentially the copy. They've just changed the name of the king. And then if we apply it to the architecture, to the astronomy, to the natural cycles of time, and we're going to examine more of this, because this is by no means the end. This is just an introduction. We're going to get into some very, very powerful geometry, metrology, and connections between all of the pyramids. But she, what I would say, is correct, that this is a religion that is highly scientific, and it's based on natural cycles, observations, and the pyramid texts are a description of these. And there is that element of the afterlife, but the afterlife just so happens to coincide with the natural cycles of the flood cycle, especially, which is repeated throughout the pyramid texts, and the astronomy of those texts as well. Even references to the blue and the green towards the end, which are a nice link to the chemistry of natron and the specialized colors there. But without a doubt, the people who built this were not primitives without a scientific mind. It's precision engineering, it's astronomical, and it is scientific, and this simply is indisputable. I don't see how anyone can argue
with these facts once they've examined the architecture, again the astronomy, and as we're going to examine more, the further connections. And this doesn't just explain the Giza complex, which is it just is, you know, but also we're going to look at the distances between these and the extraordinary information which connects to so many other elements, including some very, very, very advanced mathematics which is embedded not just in the Great Pyramid, but actually will describe how these work together. Now, Sirius, Alnitak, and Orion's belt and Sirius connecting to, again, Archet being literally referred to in those passages which reference it. Not just the equinox and summer solstice, these angles will also lead us to Kentkawe and Menkaure pyramid, and again, this is the intro. There is a whole other set of information in plain sight in regards to this. Also, from that 0 point marker, which I'm not suggesting, I'm saying explicitly that this is the point, because again, that great circle joins the corners of Khafre and the Great Pyramid, as well as cutting the Great Pyramid in the center, leading us to the alignment to Heliopolis. Now again, the diagonal from here, if I had Menkaure's pyramid, the diagonal, not just pointing to Heliopolis, which was a kilometer wide by 800 meters long, it actually points to the sacred mound, the Ben Ben mound of creation as well, and so do the other pyramids further down south. This is a design element. So the Khafre Valley Temple, Kenkaue's, Menkaure, Khafre, Khufu, these are designed with astronomical elements, but also there is a deeper geometry and a deeper scientific symbolism, that this is a textbook written in stone, and it will connect to earth-based measure systems. And that is the most extraordinary thing that we're going to examine. The relation between the Great Pyramid and the size of the Earth is out there, but this greater complex also contains that information, and that information is connected to its alignment and its distance to Heliopolis. Now, it's interesting that Iunu, now called Heliopolis, well, Baalbek in the temple complex series also was called Heliopolis. If you extend that line through the diagonal of the pyramid, it will pass through Heliopolis, and it will go not directly over the major Baalbek temple complex, but it will pass very, 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 very close to there, and there are other connections, but that's something else. Okay. This will join the other pyramids, the Maidum, Bent Pyramid, Red Pyramid, Pyramid of Unas, from where we have the metrology and the geometry will relate to each of these pyramids on Giza and how they interrelate with one another by a proportion and by measurement systems, and how these measurement systems relate to the distances from this 0 point marker to the Giza pyramids. Everything is interrelated. There is no sane person who could really define this as being coincidental or this is by design. This is simply not an accident. No sane person could contend that it is with any. There's always a room for doubt, but if that tiny little, if you have a lot of doubt, and again, I can't explain, like it's if anyone really is, you need your head read, because this is measurable, testable, it's astronomical, it's related to the seasons, and here it is. So, stretching the cord, the layout of the temples, the pyramid text, both Seshat, the gods of science, how they relate to Hermes, Mercury, Nuafu-Zi, cross time, cross cultures, cross the world, and so do the measurement systems. This is again showing that there is that at the very least the trade routes are older than what we think and more sophisticated what we think, and at the very least that's what that's the least controversial, and again I don't think that can be really contested once you compare these systems and the architecture and the similarity in their geometric design and their inherent proportions as well. Building is an act against nature. This is why surveying is so important. This is why the stretching the cord rituals are so important. This is why cornerstone ceremonies, grain, oil and wine, groundbreaking, spreading salt at groundbreaking ceremonies as they do in the East, topping out ceremonies, ribbon cuttings. Even though we don't really realize it, we're still bound to this, and it's such an important part of life. It's a shame not to make a ceremony of it. So, if you're doing a marriage, a christening, a birthday party, you want to make a ceremony of it. You want to do something special, and this is why these are so important. But it's the scientific elements that are the most confronting, and again, we're going to examine in the next part. I'm really just laying down an introduction here, because it's really going to get crazy in the next one, and it's all built on this particular system. This is a 0-point marker on the northwest corner of Caffrey Valley Temple. The sun and the cycles of nature, the rhythm of life, tell us so, and so do all the symbols, so do the pyramid text. I don't think that this should not be, and this should just not be, it's not controversial, this is just a fact. The next element, we're going to look at measurement and how these all connect in an extraordinary way. This is part of a grand design. It's a textbooks in stone. Each of these buildings are, but so is a larger complex, but so are the pyramids as a whole, and the way they connect back to Heliopolis, primary sanctuary of Seshat, god of maths, geometry, surveying, construction, accounting, the gods of science, the center of science. This was where Plateau and Eudoxus were initiated, as Strabo describes in his geography. So we've had a thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. There's much more to come. At this point, I'd like to say, if you'd like to support this work, please consider a contribution via PayPal. This has been set up. This will greatly help, and that link will be in the description. I don't. There are no no Patreon secret sort of limited videos. I'm going to be doing what I've been doing, and it will be for free. But if you can help with a PayPal contribution, that would be much appreciated. So thank you very much for watching. And we're really going to get hit some strange places in the next couple of videos. With that, cheers and have a good one.